Okay. Howdy.
大家好。
My talk today is on Christ in the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
我今天的讲座呢是 J.R.R. 托尔金的《魔戒中的基督》。
Besides the Bible, it's probably my favorite book.
这是可能是继圣经之后我最喜欢的一本书，
And it's one of the most read books of all time.
而且是有史以来阅读量最大的书籍之一。
It tells of elves and hobbits and dwarves and men and many other creatures set in a land called Middle-earth.
它讲述了精灵啊、霍比特人啊、矮人啊，还有人类啊，还有其他的一些生物，他们生活在一个叫做中土的土地上。
And before we begin, let me do a little poll just so I kind of have some understanding of how much I know about Middle-earth and the movies.
在我开始之前呢，我们先来问一些问题。
If you don't mind, go and take the poll. And
请大家
have you seen the movies and read the books?
做一个问卷调查哈。您看过电影的《指环王》没有？或者是《魔戒》？您读过《指环王》《魔戒》这本书吗？您看过与它相关的其他的霍比特人的电影吗？您读过《霍比特人》的这本书吗？您读过托尔金的其他作品，比如说《精灵宝钻》吗？您知道托尔金的好友 C.S. Lewis 就是鲁易士是谁吗？谢谢，请大家来点击回复。还有24秒钟。我们看到已经有56个人、60个人回复了，请大家继续哦。
So it seems like most of y'all have seen the movie but not read the books.
看起来大部分的人都已经看过了这个电影，但是没有看过它的原著、它的书或者是翻译的版本。
And he
Okay, so we will just stop it.
very good. I mean, classic books, great books. The movies were very, very good, particularly the Lord of the Rings movie. People have some problems with the Hobbit movie, but great movie, great books.
我必须要承认这个原著啊，还有它的电影啊，都是非常了不起的，非常的棒的电影和非常棒的书。
And one of the things that struck me, particularly in the books, is there's a lot of depth in the book. It wasn't, he has spent decades of his life. He started writing these stories back when he was 21. He continued writing these stories until he was 81 and passed away.
让我觉得很惊讶的就是这些书，它的不仅这个书很好看，但是它这个书底下有很深很深的那个层次感哈，就是因为他写了更多的这样的著作，他从21岁就开始写起，一直写到81岁他去世的时候，所以他创造了一个非常深厚的这个中土世界。
We know him today as a writer of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but his day job was he was an English professor at Oxford.
我们今天知道他就是这个非常有名的魔戒啊，然后这个Hobbit 就是霍比特人的，他的作者是他，但是实际上他的主业呢是一位教授，他是在英国的牛津大学做老师。
He loved languages. He could speak or read about 35 languages, both modern and ancient.
他的语言的天分非常的高，不管是老的这个语言或者是新式的语言，他一共能明白35种语言。
He helped translate the Jerusalem Bible.
而且有一个圣经叫做耶路撒冷圣经，他也帮助翻译。
And the entire story was just based on his love for languages.
所有这个我们今天看到的书，都是基于他对这个语言的喜爱。
He loved to make up his own languages, something he started when he was a teenager. And once he hired these languages, he needed to hire people to speak the language. And so he invented stories for those people and the cultures of the people. And then it just kept on going.
在他是一个青少年的时候，他就开始创造各种各样的语言。当他的语言慢慢的成型的时候呢，他就会觉得，我需要给这些语言加一些人，让这些人呢开始讲这些语言，而且呢要把文化加进去。这样的话，他的著作就越来越多。
For example, he invented at least 15 different dialects of Elvis.
举例来说，他一共创造了有15种的精灵的语言，
and dozens of other languages for the other races.
而且在这个书里面还有其他的各种各样的种族啊，就是人物啊、生物啊，他一共创造了超过10几种。
He was a very devout Christian.
他是一个非常非常虔诚的基督徒，
He was a very devout Catholic.
他是一个非常虔诚的天主教的教徒。
His mother died when he was 12 and he was raised by a Catholic priest.
他是母亲是12岁的时候过世，然后他是一个天主教的神父把他养大的。
One of her children became a Catholic priest.
那么他其中的一个孩子呢，也变成了一个天主教的一个神父。
And he really disliked the use of allegory, this thing in your story would directly represent something else, such as Jesus in real life.
他不喜欢寓言这种形式，他不喜欢他的故事当中的某些人事物直接代表我们这个世界上当中的某些人事物，比如说基督啊。
He preferred to use myth to represent reality, including the reality of Jesus.
相反的，他更喜欢用神话来，或者是这种就是奇幻的这个东西来代表现实，包括基督的现实。
When you read The Lord of the Ring or The Hobbit, you don't find any direct mention of Jesus or Christ or any allegory about Christ.
当我们在读《指环王》或者是《魔戒》当中，或者是读《霍比特人》的时候，我们都没有办法直接的读到耶稣这个名字，耶稣基督，不管是直接的或者是预言性的都没有。
But he considered The Lord of the Ring to be, quote, a fundamentally religious work.
但他认为而且他是自己的原话，他说他是从根本上是一个宗教信仰的作品。
That wasn't his original intention, but as he continued to write it and revise it and make it better, he put so much of himself into it, he couldn't help but to put his Christian faith into it.
虽然这不是他的初衷把它变成一个宗教信仰的作品，但是呢，随着他不断的付出努力，不断的把它完善，再完善，他越来越多的投入到这本书里面去，不知不觉他就把他自己的个人的信仰加进去，使它变成了一本基督教的书籍。
His Christian faith is in the background of the book, in the story and in the symbolism.
虽然他的这个基督教的他的信仰是处于幕后的，但是呢，他的的确确存在于他这个故事还有他的象征的意义当中。
In fact, he said that one time that he is a Christian, and if you read his books, which is basically The Lord of the Ring and The Hobbit, you could see by reading his book that he was a Christian.
尽管他的作品当中没有直接提到基督，但是他认为，就是只要你来读他的书，只要你去读《魔戒》或者是《指环王》，只要是你读《霍比特人》，那么显而易见就能发现他是一位基督徒。
I'm a token fan, I'm not a token scholar, but as I prepared for this talk, I saw that there was a very large amount of scholarly works and books after book written about Christianity and the Lord of the Rings.
我呢不是一个这个托尔金的这个学术研究者，我只是他的一个粉丝之一。但是当我准备今天的讲座的时候，我惊讶地发现有大量的学术研究介绍了这个魔戒当中的基督教它的背景、它的方面。
There are entire conferences held about Christianity and Tolkien's works. We obviously don't have time to talk about everything, but at least skim some of the Christian things in his works.
那据我所知，有很多很多的大型的会议，它就是以托尔金他的学术和他的基督教的这个联系相关的，所以这个有太多可以谈的。我们今天只简要的介绍其中的几个。
Some of them are obvious. For example, if you remember, Gandalf dies and the remains of the Fellowship goes and meets Galadriel. Galadriel tells them, "Do not let your hearts be troubled."
那比如说其中有一个情节，就是甘道夫死了以后呢，然后又与的这个叫做凯兰崔尔，或者是别的翻译本是说盖拉德利尔这一位精灵见面的时候，这个盖拉德利尔就对他说：“不要让你的心忧愁。”
Galadriel was quoting John 14:27.
其实这个盖拉德利尔就是在引用我们的圣经，在约翰福音14章的27节。
This didn't make it to the movie, but in the books, after Argon and the other had the victory in front of the Black Gate of Mordor, the eagles go back and tell the news of the victory. the song of victory is borrowing very, very heavily from Psalms 98 and Psalm 23.
这个虽然我要讲的这一段呢，就是在书里面才有，在电影上面没有，但是我们可以知道，就是当弗罗德他最后把这个魔戒终于把它毁灭的时候，他在这个末日山等死的时候被老鹰拯救了。这个老鹰在他宣布我们得胜了这个消息的时候，他大量的借鉴的都是我们的圣经，尤其是诗篇98篇和诗篇23篇。
Those quotations are obvious, not quite so obvious as if you look at the city of Mistreth, which is the capital city of Gondar, the main city of mankind, that happened to be located at exactly the same latitude as Rome is, because he was a Roman Catholic.
他说在这个他是一个罗马的这个天主教的教徒，所以呢他借鉴了他们罗马的这个城市。罗马是建在7座山上。那么当他讲到提里斯这个地方的时候，就是那个刚多尔的这个首都叫米纳斯提里斯。那么国王的居所呢，就是正好是在罗马的那个纬度，而且也像罗马城，它那个城市有7层，1、2、3、4、5、6、7，可以数出来。
That city had 7 levels. The city of Rome was built in 7 hills.
对，那个城市有7层，罗马城就是建在7座山上。
And again, I don't think this was in the movie, but in the book, it mentioned that when the fellowship leave Rivendell to go and destroy the ring, that was on December 25th.
那下面我讲的这个呢，也是在书里面有，虽然没有进到电影里面去，但是说这个护戒使者们，然后他们离开 Rivendell， 就是叫瑞文戴尔谷这个地方的时候，是在12月25号。
I think everybody knows what happened on December 25th.
所以我知道大家全部的人都明白12月25号就是我们的圣诞节。
Even more significant is what happened on March 25th.
那更重要的是3月25号所发生的事情。
It was on March 25th, again in the book that wasn't mentioned in the movie, that the ring itself was destroyed.
再一次呢，这个只是在书里面也能找到，在电影里面看不到。它是在3月25号，戒指呢被摧毁了。
Because of the ring being destroyed on that date, that was the beginning of the new year.
因为魔戒是在3月25号被摧毁，所以新的一年都是在3月25号开始。
March 25th doesn't really ring that big of a bell like December 25th.
对我来说哈，3月25号跟那个12月25号比起来呢，我真的是不太了解。
But in the Roman Catholic Church and also in the Church of England, March 25th is the feast of the Annunciation.
但是如果你要是知道的话，那么3月25号在天主教和英国的国教的日历里面都是一个非常重要的日子，因为它是一个报喜的日子。
That was the date when the angel Gabriel announced to Mary that she was with child, and hence it's considered to be the date of the conception of Jesus.
因为天使加百列是在3月25号向玛利亚宣布，她将要被圣灵感孕，怀上孩子，因此这就是耶稣受孕的传统的日子。
Even more significant, that's the traditional date for the original Good Friday, when Jesus was crucified.
对，这也是耶稣受难日的传统日期，就是那个好的星期五这一天。
Jesus undid the effect of original sin along with all the other sins mankind had created on March 25th. Frodo destroyed the ring on March 25th.
那么在圣经里面，我们知道耶稣基督他受难的时候，他是在十字架上消除了罪，原罪，也包括我们这些人所犯的一切罪的影响。同一个天呢，也就是弗罗多。他把这个魔戒消灭的日子吧。
That date's right out there in the open, but I'd never realized that until recently.
对，这个日子在书里面是显而易见的，但是我只是最近才刚刚知道。
Let me quote from something I saw online talking about this.
那我来引用一段我从网上找到的一句话。
The theological connection between the Incarnation and the Crucifixion, and hence the logical assumption that the two events happened on the same significant date, is that both events were necessary for the redemption of man from original sin.
就是有一个神学联系，是道成肉身和被钉十字架这个耶稣他发生的这两件事之间的神学联系，以及这两个事件发生在同一个日期，它的逻辑和假设是这两个事件对于人类从我们原罪当中得救赎来说都是必要的。
Put simply, Christians believe that original sin was unmade by the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Original sin is the one sin to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them.
简而言之，基督徒相信原罪是由基督的他的出生、他的受死、他的复活能够把它给消除掉的。所谓的原罪就是一个罪，统管我们所有的人，在黑暗当中捆绑我们。
As the one ring and the one sin are symbolic similitude, as the one ring is unmade in Mount Doom, so the one sin is unmade on the hill Golgotha, the place of the skull.
那正像魔戒当中的那个魔戒一样，它也是一个环统治他们，并在黑暗当中捆绑他们。一个环魔戒，还有一个罪，就是那个最初的那个罪，都是象征性的相似之处。正如一环在末日或者是厄运山上，它被毁灭，那么一个罪，我们的原罪或者是所有的罪，也是在各个他上由耶稣基督把它给除灭。
March 25th, therefore, is the key that unlocked the deepest meaning of the Lord of the Rings.
所以3月25号其实是解开指环王或者是魔戒最深层含义的钥匙。
The ring is synonymous with sin in general and the original sin in particular. The Christocentric aspects of the work becomes apparent. Frodo, as the ring bearer, emerges as a Christ figure, the one who bears the cross and with it the sin and the hopes of humanity.
那因此3月25号呢，这个既然它是就是把那个在那个魔戒是在3月25号除去的，魔戒如果是罪，特别如果它是原罪的同义词的话，那么托尔金的整个的这一部作品《魔戒》，它就是以基督为中心，这个方面就可以变得很明显了。弗罗多呢，他是那个持戒的那个人，他是以基督形象出现的，背负着十字架，他来背负着魔戒，他带着人类的希望，除去这个原罪。
Now, there's no direct Christ figure in the Lord of the Rings.
但是在《指环王》中没有直接的基督的形象。
One of Tolkien's friends, C.S. Lewis, wrote a book called The Chronicles of Narnia, and in that book, there's a lion that was exactly just like Christ, but Christ in that world.
那托尔金有一个好朋友，就是鲁易诗，他写了一套的作品，其中包括了《纳尼亚的传奇》。那在那个里面有一头雄狮，有一头雄狮，那头雄狮其实就是象征着基督他所做的事情。
There's no such figure in the Lord of the Rings.
但是在魔戒当中没有这样的一个形象。
But what we can see is what we refer to as typologies of Christ.
但是我们能看到的是一个所谓的预表。
The word Christ means anointed or the anointed one.
所谓的基督一词的意思就是受膏者。
And in the scripture, there are 3 offices that were anointed, and Christ fulfilled all 3 of those offices.
或者是说受膏的人，在圣经当中有3个受膏的职分，那么耶稣基督他履行的所有这些职分。
Those offices are prophet, priest, and king.
所以这3个职分呢是先知、牧师，还有祭司和国王。
Jesus was the perfect prophet, the perfect priest, and the perfect king.
那耶稣呢，他就是完美的先知、完美的祭司和完美的君王。
In the Lord of the Rings, we see partial Christ figures who partly and imperfectly fulfill those roles of the prophet, priest, and king.
那么在魔戒当中，我们看到了部分的基督的形象，他们是部分的不完美的，他们扮演了这个先知、祭司和君王的形象角色。
Aragorn, of course, is the king and the title character of the Return of the King.
那么阿拉贡呢，就是国王，也就是在《王者无敌》或者是《国王归来》的这本书里面的人物角色。
Tolkien described Aragorn as someone that none of us would be particularly attracted to.
托尔金把阿拉贡描述成为一个我们都不会真正被他吸引的人。
The hobbits saw him and initially were a little bit afraid of him.
当这些霍比特人第一次见到阿拉贡的时候，他们有点害怕他。
As Tolkien put it, describing him, all that is gold does not glitter.
就好像托尔金所说的，并不是所有的金子都会闪光。
Very familiar to us that are familiar with Isaiah 53. Jesus is described, he had no beauty and majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him.
就好像以赛亚书53章第2节，我们所知道非常熟悉的关于耶稣的经文里面的描写，说他在耶和华面前生长如嫩芽，像根出于干地，他无佳形美容，我们看见他的时候也无美貌，使我们爱他。
Jesus ascended to Calvary and died for us.
耶稣基督他在各个他死掉了，然后他为我们死在十字架上。
Aragon doesn't actually die, but he goes on the path of the dead.
阿拉贡虽然他没有这样死去，但是呢，他经历了一条路，就是他走在那条死亡之路上。
The path of the dead where the living are not allowed.
因为那条路呢，只有活人不允许，只有死人可以进去，不允许活人在那里面。
Yet he, like Jesus, is able to come out of the grave to victory.
但是耶稣基督就跟耶稣基督一样，能够从坟墓当中走出来，走向胜利，得胜。
Jesus rose in victory over the grave, ascended into heaven, and one day will be married to his bride, the church, and then be crowned King of Kings.
耶稣基督在战胜了坟墓之后，他就是复活了，战胜了坟墓，他进入了天堂。有一天，他将会迎娶他的新娘，就是教会，然后他会被加冕为万王之王。
Aragon passed through the path of the dead, won a great victory, ascended to the seventh level of ministry, where he was crowned king of the United Kingdom and was married.
那么阿拉贡呢，他是走出了死亡之路，赢得了一场伟大的胜利，然后他登上了米纳斯提利斯的第7层，在那里他被加冕，成为刚朵和联合王国的国王，然后他就结婚了，在那里将统治。
Jesus the Christ will rule his kingdom forever and ever. Aragon died later on. Not a perfect analogy.
耶稣将是永远的统治，我们知道永远，但是阿拉贡他会死的，他并不完全。
Gandalf seemed to have fulfilled the prophetic role.
我们再说一下甘道夫，他是履行先知职责的那一位。
Prophets are sent by God for a specific mission.
那么什么是先知呢？他就是为上帝说话，由上帝派来执行使命的那一位。
Gandalf was sent to Middle Earth to help the people of Middle Earth in the battle against Sauron.
甘道夫他被中土的半神圣的领主，他被派来，他是帮助中土的人民对抗索伦的。
He's kind of a semi-angelic being. He has supernatural powers.
他好像是一半的天使，拥有超自然的能力。
Some of them we see in books and movies.
我们在书中、在电影中都看到了其中的一部分的这种神迹。
Just like the prophets of old, at least some of them could perform miracles.
就好像圣经里面旧约的时候记载的先知，至少其中的一些先知可以行使神迹。
Just like Christ, Gandalf gave up his life.
就好像是耶稣基督一样，甘道夫也是献出了他自己的生命。
He was sent back by God, the God of token creation, to finish his mission.
但是甘道夫是被送回来了，就是复活了，因为他是被托尔金他的创造之神送回来，以完成他的使命。
Despite his special powers, he primarily helped not by doing works of wonder, but by giving encouragement and direction.
尽管甘道夫他有特殊的力量，但是他主要是通过给予鼓励和指导，而不是直接的超自然的行为来提供帮助。
Frodo can be seen to be the priest.
那第三个，我们来谈一谈佛罗德，他被视为祭司。
The priest makes sacrifices on behalf of the people.
祭司是代表人民向神献祭。
Frodo makes sacrifices to destroy the ring.
那佛罗德他就是做出了牺牲，为了要毁灭这个魔戒。
Frodo was chosen. Only Frodo could carry the ring into Mordor.
那么其实佛罗德是被拣选的，只有他可以来承受这个魔戒，进入摩多这个地方。
Only Christ could bear our sins.
就好像基督只有他自己可以承受我们所有人的罪孽。
Frodo gave up his comfortable life and desire to do that. Jesus gave up his place in heaven to come into earth, the land of the enemy.
那弗洛德他是放弃了他在夏尔的生命，才能承担这个重担。但是基督呢，他放弃了他天上的家，进入了他的敌人的领地，为了来拯救我们。
Christ had to climb to Calvary.
基督必须要爬到独楼地。
Frodo had to climb Mount Doom.
弗罗多必须要爬到末日山。
Jesus was beaten and he was so weak that he needed help from Simon or Cyrene to carry his cross.
耶稣基督被鞭打，他太虚弱了，所以他需要古利奈人西门的帮助，才能背起十字架。
Frodo was so weak from his burden that he needed help, and Sam, just like Simon, carried him up part of the way.
弗罗多他背负的这个戒指的重担，他也太虚弱了，他需要帮助，那么就有山姆来背起他来，就好像耶稣基督，就是好像古利奈人西门来帮助耶稣一样。
Christ, however, was able to complete his sacrifice. He managed to finish the job.
但是耶稣基督他可以完成他的工作，他达到了他要做的事情。
Frodo was not quite able at the end. God had to intervene.
佛罗多但是不行，他到了最后的关头，需要上帝的介入才可以做到。
Jesus died and was returned.
耶稣基督他死了又复活了。
Gandalf died and returned.
甘道夫死了也复活了。
Aragorn went to the pass of the dead and passed through.
阿拉贡前往了那个王者之路，并且通过了。
Frodo gave up his life in Mount Doom. He was prepared to die, but as he was laying on Mount Doom to die, the eagle came and returned him.
弗洛多在末日山，他也是准备要放弃他的生命，但是在死亡之前的那一刻，然后他被老鹰们拯救了。
There are several Christian themes, very important Christian themes that in the book. We won't have time to go into all of them, but let me mention a couple of them.
书中还有好几个基督教的主题，我没有时间深入的讨论，那么其中我就讲几点。
One of the most important is pity and mercy. It was the pity of Bilbo and then the pity of Frodo that spared Gollum. Had it not been for that pity, the world would have been lost.
其中我想要谈的最重要的一点，就是我们基督教信仰的慈悲和怜悯。那么比尔博和弗罗多，他们两个对咕噜的怜悯拯救了这一天。如果他们当时没有对他产生怜悯，杀掉了他，那么这一切就都完了。
Another very important theme is the theme of hope.
另外一个非常重要的主题是希望。
Hope despite darkness or fear or pessimism.
尽管有黑暗、恐惧或悲观的情绪，但是仍有盼望。
And that type of hope is only possible in a Christian world where we know we have an infinite Redeemer.
这一种盼望只有在基督教的信仰的世界才可能有，因为我们知道我们有一位无限的拯救我们的人，拯救我们的神。
The characters time after time face impossible odds, yet somehow through the help of divine providence, they are able to continue.
书里的角色还有电影里面的角色，一次又一次的面临着不可能通过的困难，但是不知道为什么，凭借着天意，他们能够继续下去。
At the end, or just before the end, they choose to attack the black gates of Mordor, even though they know there's no way they can succeed with the army.
在最后故事的结束的最后，或者是最后之前，他们选择要去攻击摩多的黑门，尽管他们的人数极少，他们明明知道根本就没有希望。
They march to the death because they hope that it might help Frodo.
但是他们还是直面死亡，并且向那个死亡冲去，因为他们希望这样做可以帮助弗罗多。
Yes, Saruman and Denethor were right. Sauron has such a huge army. He is so powerful. They have nothing more than what Gandalf called a fool's hope.
就好像萨鲁曼还有洛汗王国的那个国王德内豪他们所说的，索伦他是拥有庞大的军队，根本就没有合乎逻辑的可以得胜的手段。所以甘道夫他自己也说，他这个是个傻瓜的希望。
But Saint Paul is right when he is correct when he writes that the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
但是就好像我们的圣经里面圣保罗他这样很正确的写的，因神的愚拙总比人智慧，神的软弱总比人强壮。
As Micah 7:7 tells us, that as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation, and my God will heal me.
正好像旧约圣经弥迦书第7章第7节是这样说的：至于我，我要仰望耶和华，要等候那救我的神，我的神必应允我。
Tolkien trusted in God, and his characters share that same hope.
托尔金是一位相信上帝的人，那么他所创造的角色也拥有同样的盼望。
A really big theme I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail is divine providence.
那我再讲一讲关于这个神圣的天意。
There's a famous line from the Fellowship of the Ring where Frodo says, I wish that the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
好，那么在这个魔戒当中，就是护戒使者的这一部里面有一句名言，弗罗多他说：“我希望魔戒从来没有来找我，真希望这一切从来都没有发生过。”
Gandalf replies, so do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we had to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
甘道夫回应答：所有能看到今天这个时代的人，其实都会遇到这样的事情，这不是他们所能决定的。那我们所能决定的是什么呢？就是在所赐给我们的这一点仅有的时间里面，我们该做什么？
There are other forces that work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil.
他说：“弗罗多，除了邪恶的意志，这个世界上还有其他的力量在起作用。”
Bilbo is meant to find the ring.
比尔博他其实在命定当中是他要找到魔戒。
In which case, you're also meant to have it.
那么现在呢，你也是命定应该持有它的人。
And that is an encouraging thought.
这个想法是为了能鼓励你才对。
There's something in the world besides the forces of evil.
除了邪恶的力量之外，世界上的的确确还有其他的力量在起作用。
The ring has a will of its own. It wants to be found. It wants to find its way back to Sauron.
戒指，这个魔戒，它有自己的意志，它想要找回到索伦那里的路。
But there's another will, a more powerful will beside that to the ring maker.
但是在这个创造魔戒的这个制造者的他意外之中，还有他的意志之外，还有另外一个意志。
That power is never named in the book.
在书里面，托尔金从来没有把这个另外的这个更高的意志提出来。
But Tolkien has said that power is never absent in the book.
但是就好像托尔金自己宣称的，书中从来没有提及的那一种力量，从未在他的书里缺席过。
He wrote one of his friends that other power, the writer of the story,
在他的一封写给朋友的信当中，他写到，那另外的一种力量，其实就是这个我写的这个书的真正作者。
and by the writer of the story, he did not mean himself.
所以当他说这个真正作者的时候，并不是指他自己说的。
That one ever-present person who is never absent and never named.
他说那一个真正写我这个故事的那一位他是永远存在，他从不缺席，也从不命名。
The God of Middle Earth is in control of that land, and he is the actual writer of the story.
那一位中土之神，他控制这一片土地，他才是我现在所写的这个故事的作者。
And Tolkien applies this to himself.
那么同样的这个逻辑托尔金也应用在他自己的身上。
God, Almighty God, is the author of his life.
他认为万军之耶和华是他生命的创造者。
All the good that he has done, including the writing this book, is part of the divine author's plan.
他所做的一切善事都是包括写这本书这一套书，都是跟这个神圣的作者合作才达到的。
Tolkien considered himself not to be the creator of the Lord of the Ring, but to be the sub-creator of the Lord of the Ring, because the divine author was the actual creator.
那托尔金他自己认为他不是这一套作品的真正的创造人，他是第二创造人，是因为那一位神他才是真正写作的人。
Psalm 45:1, the psalmist declared that his tongue is like the pen of the scribe. There's someone, he can't just help but to say what has been put on his heart by the scribe.
就好像在我们旧约诗篇里面第45章第1节，那个诗人他是内心溢出来的喜悦。那么他这样写的，他说我的舌头好像文士的笔，好像是快手笔，所以不是他自己能够写，而是那位神把这个涌出来的美词放在他的嘴里写出来。
We can see example after example of divine providence throughout the book and the movies. It's clear in the books, but it's in the movies as well sometimes.
我们可以在整本书里看到神圣天意的一个又一个的例子，但是书中的比电影的更清晰一些。
There are several examples I'm going to talk about from the books, even before they get to be at the very beginning, example after example of divine providence. And the characters in the book say, this did not just happen by chance. It seemed to have happened by chance, but there's something behind this.
所以就是在霍比特人他们到达 Bree 就是布里这个地方之前，其实已经有一次又一次神圣天意达成了这一切。
I'm going to mess up my translator here because I'm going off script.
他现在要脱稿，然后看看我能不能给翻译好。
But since most of you seen the movie, let me give an example for the movie and the books.
既然大家大部分人都看过电影，那么我来问几个问题，看看大家能不能知道答案。
You remember at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship is broken when Boromir tried to take the ring from Frodo, and then Boromir dies, killing many orcs to try to save Merry and Pippin.
还记得吗？就是在护戒使者到最后，这个波尔密尔，中文不知道怎么翻译，波洛密尔就是刚铎的那个大儿子，他为了要拯救这几个小的这个霍比特人，那么他就跟这个半兽人作战，然后他很英勇的就牺牲了。
Aragorn and the others are torn, so they have to go after Merry and Pippin, or after Frodo and Sam.
那么其中的2个霍比特人就被绑走了，一个叫皮平，还有一个叫做 Mary。那么这个阿拉贡这个国王呢，就还有跟另外的2个他的朋友就去追赶。
They decide to go and save Merry and Pippin.
他们认为虽然说山姆和弗罗多已经去到了那个河的对岸，要继续的往摩多去，我们的任务呢，就是要去追回来皮平和这个 Mary。
But before that, they wanted to honor Boromir and to give him a proper burial.
但是在那之前，他们想要正式的，然后庄重的给这个死去的刚多的这个大儿子，然后给他一个葬礼。
They spent about 3 hours burying him, and because of those 3 hours, they're never able to catch up with the orcs and Merry and Pippin.
但是他们用了3个小时的时间，然后给他挖了一个坟地，然后把它放进去。就是因为他们损失了这3个小时，所以他们就一直就不能够去追上了那些半兽人，然后把皮平和 Mary 抢回来。
Because of the failure to catch up with Merry and Pippin, divine providence means that they get saved another way.
因为他们不能够去拯救皮平和 Mary， 那么天意就安排了其他的方式来拯救这2个小小的霍比特人。
Because of that choice to bury Boromir, Merry and Pippin get saved by Fronkon in the forest.
因为他们要用3个小时时间来正式的来埋葬波尔密尔，那么皮平和 Mary 呢，他们就会进到了刚多这个森林里面，然后反而见到了那些树仆。
Frogon and the rest of the Ents helped defeat Isengard and Saruman.
对，正因为他们遇到了树狐，然后才能够得到他们的帮助，然后才能够打败萨鲁曼和他的塔。
Without the help of the Ents, Gondor would have been defeated. Without Gondor, Rohan would have been defeated. Without Rohan, Gondor would have been defeated.
如果当时那个皮平和 Mary 没有去到树狐那里，如果树狐没有去加入战斗，如果他没有加入战斗，那么那个洛汗王国一定会失败。如果洛汗王国被那个打败了，他们就不可以来到这边在那个最后的那个黑暗之城，那个黑暗的门口，然后参加最后的一场决战。
Many other examples of this.
我们还有更多类似的这个例子。
When you get to the end of the book, Frodo gets to Mount Doom. He's there to destroy the ring, but he's unable to.
当我们读到这本书的结尾，佛罗多无法摧毁戒指，因为他到了最后的末日山的那个最后那一刹那，他改了主意。
He chooses to put it on himself and to claim the ring for himself instead of finishing his job.
他在最后的一刻把这个戒指戴在他的手上，然后把这个魔戒变成他自己的，而不是说要去摧毁它。
Gollum with Smeagol comes and bites it off of his hand and claims it for himself.
但是咕噜就是这个斯密哥，他把他这个手指头给咬了下来，把这个戒指拿了过来，然后据为己有。
Now, in the movie after this, Frodo and Gollum fight for the ring, and Gollum and the ring end up falling into the crack of Mount Doom and dying, and the ring is destroyed.
在电影里面，我们看到是弗罗多和咕噜他们为了魔戒而战，到了最后呢，是魔戒和这个咕噜一同掉进了末日山的那个裂痕里面，进入了火山这个流言。然后呢，这个时候那个魔戒才会被摧毁。
That's not what happened in the book.
但是在书里面并不是这样记述的。
Gollum bites off the ring. He is so happy, so overcome to get the ring back. He dances for joy, and as he is dancing, he slips and falls into the crack of Mount Doom.
这个书里面是这样说的：当咕噜最终夺回了魔戒，他高兴的起舞，但是不小心掉进了末日山的裂缝，他和戒指都被摧毁了。
A lot of people blame Frodo for not being able to destroy the ring.
但是有很多的人指责弗罗多，你这个人怎么没有办法亲自的摧毁戒指呢？
I mean, as the first time I read it, I thought, yes, he should have destroyed the ring. But as I got older, I can understand the power in the ring, the dwell on the ring.
所以在我的年轻的时候，我第一次读这套剧作的时候，我也觉得这个弗罗多应该是能够亲自摧毁魔戒的，他为什么不能呢？但是当我这个年纪越来越就是长起来的时候，我也慢慢的明白了，就是他为什么托尔金是这样写作。
Tolkien himself didn't really think that young children should read The Lord of the Rings because they wouldn't understand that choice not to grab the ring for himself.
但是托尔金写这个作品的时候，根本他的这个写作的对象不是年幼的孩子或者是 teenager， 就是青少年，因为他认为在一个人没有成熟之前，他不会理解为什么这个魔戒不能够被弗罗多所摧毁。
But Tolkien explains in one of his letters that it was divine providence. God stepped into the book and made Gollum slip.
那托尔金在他的一封信当中是这样解释这个部分的，他说又一次显示了上帝的天意，是上帝在这一刻他介入了这个中土世界的这个领土，然后他使这个咕噜滑跌到这个末日山的裂缝底下。
As he wrote in one of his letters, it was quite impossible for Frodo to surrender the ring, an act of will, especially at the point of its maximum power where it was created.
所以在他的信里，他继续这样写道：弗罗多完全不可能放弃魔戒的，就是靠他自己的力量，无论是他的行动、他的举止，或者他的脑子里面的他的意愿，尤其是在这一刻，那个魔戒的力量已经达到了最大化。
We must face the fact that the power of evil in this world is not finally resistible by finite beings such as ourselves, however good we are.
他继续写道说，人必须面对一个事实，就是世界上的邪恶的力量，最终不是我们这一些肉身当中的被造之物能够抵抗的，无论我们是多么的良善。
And the writer of the story is not one of us.
但是这个作品的真正的作者就是那一位神，他并不属于我们当中的一个。
As a Catholic, Tolkien went to church almost every day, recited the Lord's Prayer almost every day.
作为一个天主教的教徒，非常虔诚哦。这个托尔金大概每一天都是去教会的，而且每一天都在诵读，就是上帝的主祷文。
But we know that when Tolkien says it's only required that we can do what we can do, which is always much more than we think we can do.
他说他需要的仅仅是说我们尽我们所能，但是总是 超过我们想到我们能做的事情，比我们认为的要多得多的这些事情。
Father deserved all honor because he spent every drop of his power of will and body, and that was just enough to bring him to the point no further.
然后他继续写到说，佛罗多配得上所有的荣耀，因为他用尽了他的意志和他身体里面的每一滴力量，但是这足以让他到达所注定要去的地方，仅此而已，不可能再往前走一步了。
Few others, possibly no one else of his time, would have gotten so far.
很少有其他的人，可能在那一个时代，在那个佛罗多的那个时代，没有任何其他的一个人可以像他那样走到这一步。
The other power then took over. The wider the story, by which I mean did not mean myself.
所以托尔金继续写道说，然后在那一刻，另外一个更加超然的那个力量就接管了这个故事的进行，就是这个故事的真正的作者，我不是讲我自己，而是超越我的那一位神。
As a Christian, Tolkien knew that we are all sinners. We are all fail at some points.
作为一个基督徒，托尔金完全知道我们都是罪人，我们无法抗拒邪恶，总有败坏的那一天。
None of us is good enough on our own. We all need help to get through our weakness.
我们没有一个人靠自己足够好，我们都需要帮助，因为我们都有弱点。
We have a power, the wider the story of our lives, who can take over.
有另外一种力量，就是这个他所写的这一套书的真正的作者，他会接管我们。
He wrote in one of his letters that this is the embodiment of the phrase in the Lord's Prayer, lead us not into temptation.
那托尔金在他的另一封信当中是这样解释的，他说主导文里面有一句叫做不叫我们遇见试探，那么它的体现就在底下。
There exists, quote, he wrote, the possibility of being placed in position beyond one power, in which case, as I believe, salvation from ruin will depend on something that is apparently unconnected.
所以这个话是说存在于就是任何一个人存在于这种一个位置，这个什么位置呢？就是被置于超出自己能力的这么一个位置，它是有可能的。在这种情况下，他也相信从毁灭当中得到拯救，取决于一些明显无关的事情。
When things seem hopeless, when you do not have the power to do it, God will provide a way.
当我们绝望的时候，当我们认为这是不可能达到的事情，不可能达到的时候，那么上帝他就会介入，使他成就。
Tolkien wrote one of the greatest novels of all time.
托尔金写了有史以来最伟大的小说之一。
It was not written specifically to bring people to Christ, but Tolkien was convinced if you read his book, you would see that he was indeed a Christian.
这本书的写作并不是为了让人们能够来到基督的面前，但是托尔金他认为，如果你仔细的阅读他的著作，你应该能够看得出来，他是一名基督徒。
His Christian faith is obvious to those who look in his books.
他的基督教的信仰，如果你仔细的看的话，一定会向你展现。
Tolkien did what he could do so that he could glorify God.
托尔金他所做的一切都是为了荣耀上帝而做的。
Many other things you could say about Christianity in the Lord of the Rings, but the main thing is just to remember Christ is there, Christianity is there, hidden, but not that deeply hidden.
所以很多的人还会更多的阐述他的著作和基督教之间的关系，但是最重要的一点就是如果你想要去看到的话，它其实藏得并不深，你完全可以从他的字里行间看出来他的基督教的信仰对他的方方面面的影响。
Remember, there's an author who is writing the story of our lives.
他说要记住就是有一位那个书写我们人生的那一位，他就是神。
Back to Eric.
Okay, Eric.